This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Yeah, beautiful.
I don't know. It's fine.
Okay, it's just 9:05, so I think we will get started. Sorry, just give me a moment while I find your bio. Okay. All right. So welcome everyone to a very special roundtable today on a different time for us, but also a very difficult time for Robert. It's midnight in the UK. So we've got Dr. Robert Seymour. He's based at UCL. And he's been working with really interesting wearable OPMs, which all of us are keen to use in the future. And so yeah, I'm really pleased to have you speak to us. So a little bit about Robert's background. So as I said, he's based in the UK, and he's done his PhD at Macquarie University in Sydney. Is that right? And this is stock at UCL. Did I miss any other detail?
Oh, I mean, no, that's yeah. It is nice to hear some Australian accents again. I really enjoyed my time there. So
that's good. I've been trying to work on my Australian accent, so it's nice of you to say that. Okay, so yeah, I'm looking forward to hear you talk about OPMs and MEG and also in naturalistic applications, which is definitely something that the field is moving towards, and so that's really exciting. So thank you. So please take it away.
cool. Thank you very much. Yeah. I hope that's going to progress. Cool. So I guess the take-away message that I want you to leave with is that OPMs are developing into a valuable neuroimaging tool, and they are particularly appealing for conducting naturalistic experiments. So today I'm going to be talking about three things. First of all, a sort of technical introduction to OPMs and the noise. Secondly, I'm going to show that OPMs can be used to measure neural activity while a person is moving about. And then lastly, I'm going to be talking about a study where we've combined OPMs with some virtual reality. Feel free to ask questions at any point, by the way. Cool. So just a little introduction to OPMs, or optically pumped magnetometers. So OPMs use the quantum properties of atoms to sense local magnetic fields. An OPM is made up of three parts. You've got the glass cell here, which contains a rubidium vapor. And you've got a laser, which is then detected by a photo detector. And the amount of light that is passing through the rubidium vapor becomes a sensitive marker of neuromagnetic fields. So when a magnetic field passes close to the rubidium vapor, it allows more light to pass through and to be detected. So the current generation of OPMs, well, actually we're now on generation 3, but they've now been made extremely small, the size of a Lego brick, and they've got a noise floor of around 10 femtotesla per root hertz. So I'm sure, as you know, OPMs don't require cryogenic cooling like a conventional MEG. And this has advantages in that they can be placed closer to the scalp, which means that the signal amplitude is actually higher. So on the right here, we've got an example median nerve experiment with data collected from a CTF system in the red, and then in the blue with an OPM system. And you can see that the amplitude of the signals that we measure from the brain are a lot higher. Now, the noise is also higher as well, but we will get on to that later on. And the other advantage is that OPMs can be integrated into a wearable helmet. As you can see on the right-hand side, the person wearing this looks extremely happy. And yeah, we can use OPMs to measure neural activity as a person is moving around. And this opens up the opportunity for more naturalistic experiments. So just going to really briefly cover OPMs and interference. I would suggest that for anyone interested in this particular area, we wrote a review paper back in 2022, and that goes into a lot of technical details. So OPMs actually face some unique challenges in terms of the interference or the noise that they measure alongside the neural activity. The current generation of OPMs are predominantly zero field magnetometers. So what this means is that they can only operate where the magnetic field is really, really low, and they are magnetometers. So they have not yet been made into gradiometers, like a lot of the conventional SQUID-based MEG systems. Another consideration is that movement of the sensors relative to background fields in the MSR causes these large low frequency artifacts. So yeah, there are definitely those to clean up when you've got experiments and paradigms that involve a person actually moving around the MSR. And another consideration, technology that is needed for naturalistic paradigms that has to be introduced into the magnetically shielded room. This also introduces noise as well. So things like motion capture systems and a VR headset here. All of these things include electrical components. So they are going to interfere with the OPMs. Some of the ways of reducing the interference. So at UCL, we have quite a large magnetically shielded room with the Gaussian coils, and then other places around the world also have these external coils as well. And that's just to get the fields in the room as low as possible so that the OPMs can operate. In terms of the signal processing, all of the standard approaches can be used. And in particular with OPMs, we have found that spatial filtering works extremely well too. And in recent years, there have been OPM-specific spatial filtering approaches. For example, homogeneous field correction, which was developed at UCL by Tim Tini, and an iterative version of the SSS algorithm. Don't have time to go into any details, but if you're interested, I would recommend checking out both of the articles there. So the last thing to mention about the paper is that we actually include some data analysis tutorials. So an auditory evoked field paradigm and a finger tapping paradigm as well. So we sort of talk through how to load in the data, how to clean it up, how to process the OPM data. So hopefully people will find that quite useful when they're starting to get into working with OPM data and sort of how it differs slightly from a conventional MG data. Cool. So in this second part, I'm going to talk you through a study where we showed that OPMs can measure neural activity while a person is moving around. So, as I said, one of the main benefits of OPMs is wearability, opening up opportunities for naturalistic paradigms, for clinical scanning, and for pediatric scanning as well. So, actually, back in 2001, as 2021, I mean, we set out to answer the question whether we can use OPMs to actually record activity from the brain while people are moving freely around a magnetically shielded room. So to do this, we just did a really simple proof of principle experiment. 2 healthy adults with 43 Q-spin OPMs. So these were the generation 2, I believe. So they measure the 2 orientations of the magnetic field. So that equates to 86 channels. And a really simple auditory tone paradigm every half a second. And we record activity in 3 conditions: when the person was sitting still, when they were standing up but keeping their head still, and then standing up and continually moving their head. So that's the crucial condition here. Can we still find sort of the classic auditory evoked fields when people are standing and continually moving around? So here, at the same time, we have motion capture. And here I'm plotting on the y-axis the distance that the person moved their head from the start of the experiment. And you can see here that the range of movements is extremely large. In the participant 1, it goes up to almost 120 centimeters. And the other thing to notice is that the movement is continuous. So it's not like the person has moved their head halfway through. They really are continually moving their head as they are listening to the auditory tones. So on to the data from the OPMs at the sensor level. So on all of these graphs, going to be plotting on the y-axis the t-value, and then on the x-axis is time. And what you can see here is that in the sitting and the standing condition, when people were still, we can see these very clear auditory responses at 100 milliseconds, and then a later response too. And that is in both the sitting and the standing condition. So when we plot the standing and moving condition, we can see that there might be something there, especially in participant 2. There seems to be some evoked activity at around 100 milliseconds. But overall, the picture is that the data is a lot noisier. We haven't cleaned up all of the noise there, and the t-values are lower compared to the other two conditions. So in an attempt to clean up the data, we turned to source localization. We used a fairly standard LCMV beamformer to localize the M100 response. And we were hoping that beamformer would act as a data-driven spatial filter to help clean up the OPM data. So I do have results from the whole brain, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to show results from a virtual electrode in a bilateral auditory cortex. And here in the green and the orange, plotting the evokes activity for the sitting and the standing condition. And as you can see, really clear responses at 100 milliseconds. And the other thing to notice is that the responses are highly correlated across the two the conditions. And what was extremely nice to see was that in the standing and the moving condition, after we've used the beamformer, the auditory evoked responses start to look almost exactly like the other two conditions, with a peak and at exactly the same time, and the amplitude of the t-values is also extremely similar to the other two conditions. So, as an interim summary, wearable MEG or OPMs can be used to measure neural activity while people are standing and moving. The spatial filtering properties of the beamformer are crucial for cleaning up some of that low frequency interference as people are moving around the magnetically shielded room. And this opens up opportunities for using OPMs in more naturalistic experiments. So I guess if anyone has any questions at this point, I'd be happy to answer them before I move on.
was muted. Okay. Hi, Rob.
Cool.
So
Hi.
I'm curious about in terms of the interference suppression algorithm, if it's
Yeah.
like not the standard kind of like recording without movement in the room, like in the environment at UCL, do you still need to use that for data pre-processing?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Sorry.
Okay. Should
You
I?
can ask again. It is a lot better now.
Oh, okay.
Good
So
thing.
if we basically recorded when people are not moving around at UCL, do you still need to use the interference suppressing algorithm, or that's only needed when people are moving around during recording?
Yeah, so it is needed even if people are not moving around. The data is a lot cleaner, but still it is improved. It is improved by using the interference suppression algorithms. Our lab, as you know, is in central London, so there's a lot of traffic, and the tube is underneath. So even if people are actually still, there is a whole load of external noise that can be taken away by spatial filtering approaches.
So that's the special filtering like that team developed.
Yeah, so in the data I've just shown, we use HFC, which is homogeneous field correction. Essentially, I won't go into too much detail, but it models the data as a spatially homogeneous field. So just really, really simple. And then subtracts that from the data using a linear regression. There are more complex approaches now as OPM systems get more channels. Things like SSS and TSSS and those related approaches will start to be of benefit because you have the spatial oversampling that is going to help to clean up the OPM data a lot.
I see. So sorry, just a follow-up question. So is that integrated into the data acquisition pipeline, or it's normally done post hoc?
Post hoc. Steph, who is a postdoc in our lab, has a paper on sort of a feedback system using HFC. So that's quite an interesting approach, but I think the software manufacturers are going for a closed loop kind of operation now, just to keep the sensors in range. That's the key thing, because as soon as they go sort of plus or minus 1.5 nanotesla, all sorts of weird things start to happen.
So that's the dynamic nulling that QSpin is currently like encouraging people using.
So that's not the dynamic nulling, because those are the external coils. Yeah. And that's for MSRs that are not as high quality as the one at UCL. The gradients in the room are a lot higher, which means that any movement, if you didn't have the coils, movement through the gradient would just cause really really massive changes. So yeah, a lot of labs who have already got MSRs but have sort of reused them for OPMs have to use these external coils to get the fields in the center of the room as low as they can, using a reference array to then to dynamically control the nulling.
Mhm. But that's not the UCL gown currently are using. Sorry,
No,
am I
yeah, no. So at UCL, we don't have that. We've got a 4-layer MSR, which so we are quite lucky in the gradients in the room are not very strong. So we can get away with not using that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
I also have a question about the range of low frequency interference. So what is that typically?
It depends how much you move and the gradient of your magnetic field. So as I said, the Q-spin or try to keep the range of the sensors plus or minus 1.5 nanotesla. They can go up to plus or minus 5, but then after then you start getting issues with gain and with non-linearities. So yeah, it's a hard question to answer because it will depend on everybody's setup basically.
Thank you.
If there's no more,
Oh, he's muted.
oh, yeah, cool. So if there are no more questions, then I will move on to the next part, if that's all right. Cool. So yeah, in the last part, I'm going to tell you about our recent experiment where we've combined OPMs with some virtual reality to study the encoding and the retrieval of autobiographical memories. So that's cool. Yeah, just a really brief introduction to autobiographical memory. It is the recall of a specific event from a person's life. And events are linked to a specific time and place, and they will have a personal involvement. And this is in contrast to the semantic memory, which is just the general knowledge of facts. What's really interesting is that autobiographical memory paradigms activate a different set of brain regions to traditional lab-based memory tasks. So first of all, focusing on autobiographical memory retrieval, we know that that retrieving events from our autobiographical memory involves changes in oscillations in the autobiographical memory network. So regions such as the retrospinal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, and the medial temporal lobe, including the hippocampus. And we also know that this can be recorded with OPMs. So back in 2019, Daniel Barry, he showed that when people are recalling experiences, there is a decrease in theta band power in the hippocampus. So the question that we're really trying to answer in this study is how are the memories actually formed in the first place? So researching encoding is a lot harder to study, as most neuroimaging technologies require people to lie alone and very still. And it's extremely difficult for people to have natural experiences while they're having a brain scan. So that's why we have turned to OPMs, as we need a way of imaging the brain while people are experiencing and presumably encoding natural lifelike events. And our overall hypothesis is that the successful encoding and the retrieval of these experiences will modulate oscillations in the autobiographical memory network. So to study this, as I said, we have combined OPMs with some virtual reality. So my colleague, he is a real expert in Unity. And for this study, he has constructed a virtual reality town, which took him a long time. And this was, so the other thing to mention is that we try to get the OPMs working with a head-mounted display, where you wear it on your face. But yeah, this caused too much interference. So for the moment, for this study anyway, we have just gone with the option of presenting the virtual reality town on this large screen inside the magnetically shielded room with audio here. And yeah, you can see the person is stood extremely close to the screen. So almost their entire visual field is the virtual town. So we acquired OPM data at the same time. So that's the view from the front, which looks really nice. The view from the back maybe isn't quite as nice, little bit more untidy, I'd say. But yeah, so just point out a few things here. We've obviously got, hopefully you can see my pointer, but we've got the screen here. We've got the OPMs, which are held in a backpack. The cables are managed up to the head. In the corner here, I'm not sure if you can see this, but there is a motion capture camera. And then in order to, these were generation 2 and 3 Q-spin OPM, so the cables are quite heavy. So to take off some of the weights, we've come up with this highly technical solution of having the cables on a chair. So yeah. Cool. So people move through the virtual town via a walk in place methods, and this was controlled by real-time motion capture. They essentially made a movement like you can see here on the right-hand side, keeping the front of your feet on the ground and then essentially moving your heels up and down. So participants wore these reflective markers on their feet, and this was we use motion capture to then detect when a person was moving their feet. And then this was translated in real time into motion through the virtual environment. So people could not turn, they could only go in one direction. But I think in future studies, it would be really cool to have the camera controlled by the direction of their head as well. So again, I'm not quite sure how well this is going to work on Zoom, but we shall see. Oh God, that's loud. So yeah, this is what it kind of looks like here. Not sure how well you can see that, but yeah, the person was moving their feet up and down, and then that was being translated into motion through the virtual environment. As you can imagine, this experimental setup is really technically challenging. So this took us a lot of time, basically. We had to combine presentation of video. Okay, thanks. Yeah, there was, yeah, we had to combine presentation of the video with the audio, the OPMs, the motion capture. We had to do, we had to also incorporate experimental triggers when people reached certain locations. So all of this has to work together. And yeah, it took us a long time to get everything working, but yeah, each experimental session was really long, and at least one thing broke. But yeah, in the end, we managed to acquire. Yeah, we managed to acquire 12 the data sets. So just a little bit more about what the experiment entailed now. This consisted of a self-paced tour around the virtual town, and people stopped to experience 21 lifelike events, which were all pre-programmed to occur at particular locations. Examples include a visit to a museum to learn about a Hindu exhibit. A man stops the avatar who's kind of showing you the town and asks him for the directions. And then we stop to hear a local guitarist. So participants experience these events in the same order, and the whole experience lasted around half an hour. So again, I'm going to attempt to play a video, which is an example of one of the events here. Not sure if the sound's going to come through, but there should be subtitles. Yeah, this is the local guitarist. Okay, hopefully that came through. Kind of. Cool. So yeah, as I said, we have collected data from 12 healthy adults, and we had a whole head OPM setup, 46 of 55 sensors, equating to 120 to 137 channels. We used these custom 3D printed scanner casts, and the data were pre-processed using a fairly standard pipeline. So people then came back the next day and were also scanned while recalling what the events both silently and also out loud. So yeah, that's some example there. The recall was audio recorded, it was transcribed, and it was scored according to a standardized system called the autobiographical interview. The details of the scoring are not important, but the higher the score, the more details that they remembered about the event. Cool. So just to show you some behavioral data, this is a graph showing the total number of details across the entire experience for all 12 of the participants, and they were split into details that were true, false, and unverifiable. And you can see that people were, on the whole, really accurate. It was only 24 hours later, and they only incorporated a few details that were false. So participants remembered the majority of events. However, the quality of the recall did actually vary. So this is one example, a participant here. On the y-axis, the number of details, and this is each event. Interestingly, this person remembered most details about the old pub. So we performed a median split, essentially, just to split the events in every single person into those that were well remembered versus those that were poorly remembered. And I will come back to this later on. Cool. So now to the OPM data. And this is going back to the encoding. So as they were going through the virtual town. First of all, I want to show some data. Can we find sort of some classical MEG responses with our naturalistic setup? What are the neural responses to the lifelike experiences? And lastly, I'm going to talk about event boundaries. So first of all, the proof of principle, we compared activity when a person was in an event compared to a resting state scan. And we hypothesized that where there would be a reduction in alpha power in the visual cortex as there is something on screen. They are actively processing things. And this is indeed exactly what we find, really strong alpha desynchronization in the visual cortex. So that was extremely nice to see. And then in the second proof of principle analysis that we did, we compared times in the experience when a person was walking versus when they were still, and we were hoping to find the classic reduction in beta power in motor cortex, and that is exactly what we found here. And I think what's extremely nice about the result here is that the beta desynchronization localizes really precisely to the leg area. So it seems like we've really isolated, when a person was walking compared to when they were still. Cool. So the second result I want to share is about the neural responses to lifelike experiences. For this analysis, we compared OPM data when people were in an event to a low-level control task. So this is using a scrambled image, and the person had to follow some dots that moved around the screen, and this is to mimic eye movements, and there was also some audio played as well. It's not a perfect control task, but it's very, very tricky to think of a control task for everyday life, basically. So first of all, we focused on the alpha band, and as you can see, we found a desynchronization in the retrosplenial cortex, and this also went into the posterior cingulate as well. Next, in the gamma band, we also found an increase in power now in the retrosplenial cortex, but that also extended into the anterior cingulate as well. So overall here, there are quite a lot of modulations of brain rhythms during the tour of the virtual town. The retrosplenial cortex seems to be the most prominent region, and this is consistent with previous EEG studies that have found activity in the retrosplenial cortex during navigation and when viewing scenes. Interestingly, there was no engagement of the hippocampus or medial prefrontal regions. So perhaps memory-related activity is more time-locked, more to specific times in the tour of the virtual town, which I will get onto in the next part. So the last result I want to share is about event boundaries. So in this long, dynamic, naturalistic experience, what are the time points that could be important for encoding these experiences into our autobiographical memory? And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it could be at these event boundaries. In our experiments, it consisted of people actually being in an event where they were still, and then they walked off to the next event. And it's at the boundary in between these two things where it could be a really important time point for encoding. So that's what I've said here. And we also know that a brain region that's really important for this is the hippocampus. It responds to event boundaries. And this has been shown a lot in fMRI, mainly while participants are watching TV shows or movies. Here, we wanted to see whether we could find the same kind of responses in our OPM data. And we focused initially on the gamma band in the hippocampus, given the role of these oscillations in LTP and learning. So here I'm plotting the event boundary response in the hippocampus. On the y-axis, we've got the percentage change in power across the entirety of the experiments, and time zero here indicates the end of an event. And what's really nice to see is that in both the left and also the right hippocampus, we see this really clear event boundary response, which lasts from 3 to 7 seconds in the left hippocampus, maybe slightly noisier in the right hippocampus, but still with a peak at around 4 seconds. So next, we were interested in whether it was only the hippocampus or were there other regions that were engaged as well. So using the beamformer, we localized activity 3 to 7 seconds in the gamma bands. And yeah, it's not only the hippocampus, it's a widespread network of regions that actually responds to these event boundaries. Regions like the retroscranial cortex, VTPJ, and the visual cortex. I think what's really nice about this result is that it replicates a lot of previous work that's been done in fMRI, using audiobooks, but also in watching the TV shows as well. So the last result I'm going to show today are these boundary responses related to memory encoding. If you remember from before, we split events into those that were well remembered versus those that were poorly remembered. Are these event boundary responses different in between these two types of events? So in the green, I'm going to be plotting the well remembered, and in the purple, the poorly remembered. And what's really nice to see in the right hippocampus, we have this this increase in activity and event boundary response that is only in the well remembered events here. So this is the first results, or the first the subsequent memory effects that we have actually found in our OPM data. Cool. So as you can tell, analysis, it's a really complex data set. So we are definitely halfway through analyzing it. We're going to do some whole brain subsequent memory contrasts. Can we find regions of the brain that predicts if an event will be well or poorly remembered? And it'd be really cool to try and link encoding and retrieval as well. Okay, so the overall conclusion, OPMs face some unique challenges in terms of reducing some of the interference. OPMs can be used to record activity while people are standing and moving around. And interactive virtual reality can be combined with OPMs to study how the brain responds to natural experiences and how they are encoded into our autobiographical memory. So yeah, I'd like to thank everyone on this slide, in particular Eleanor, who acquired the funding for this work, and also Nick as well. So we've been working on the same project now for 4.5 years. So yeah, this has definitely been a collaborative effort. Thanks as well to everyone at the UCL OPM team for all of their technical support. Yeah, thank you for your attention, and happy to answer any questions.
That was great, Robert. Thank you so much. So impressive work, and you know, so novel. And it fills my head with ideas for possibilities of what we might be able to do in a few months' time when our system is up and running, hopefully.
Cool.
Fingers crossed. I'm sure there's lots of questions, and I have questions as well. I think I'll just ask two clarification questions.
Yes.
In the last study, all the MEG data that you showed, was that at encoding, right? Or was it some of it
Yeah.
at retrieval? Okay.
Yeah, that was at encoding. Yeah.
Oh, encoding. Okay. That makes sense. And the increase in power that you see peaking around 4 seconds, is that 4 seconds after the event boundary? Is the zero,
Yes.
is zero basically the change? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah, zero. It's not always the case, but yeah, zero is basically when they start to move away.
When it's starting to move away. Okay. Okay. Because yeah, I was thinking, how do you determine?
Yeah, so
what the event is in a very dynamic.
exactly. It's I think one of the advantages of our study is that the event boundaries are quite clear in that it is when people are actually moving away. Whereas in a TV show or a movie, they can be quite subjective as to when that is actually happening. So yeah, I think that is definitely an advantage, even that we've got really tight control as to we know when a person is moving moving away.
Mhm. I also had a question about sorry, I'm kind of taking over the floor. I'll give the floor away in a minute. You know how you split the well remembered versus the poorly remembered, but to me that was very much a continuum, and I wonder whether you could do the same analysis in a continuous manner rather than a categorical split, and whether you would see continuity in the power for, I forget what frequency band that was, but you know, instead of a categorical split, would you have seen some continuity?
Yeah, that is a really good question. It is definitely continuous. There are there's not a bimodal peak. We have tried that analysis actually in the last couple of weeks, and yeah, nothing really comes out in SPM. I just don't think we've got quite enough power with only 21 events to model the time series in that way, using a regression approach.
Yeah, fair enough. Right. Okay, I'll save my other question for later. Questions from here?
This is just out of curiosity. Also, thank you for your talk. That was amazing. Just out of curiosity, in terms of the types of events, was there any events that overall out of all the participants was more likely to be remembered?
Yeah, so that is a really good question and a really good point. The answer is yes, not massively. I do probably have a slide somewhere, but not massively more or less, but there are consistencies in the fact that some events are remembered more than others. So we have thought about this quite a lot, and yeah, for a lot of the initial analysis, we were using scores that were normalized, but we've kind of moved away from that now because I think that I'm convinced that some events are just more interesting, and that is everyday life, and probably the memory network is responding to that as well. So it's a really, you can't really standardize everyday events. But yeah, I think the town hall clock was really not remembered well, but then the visit to the museum was remembered really well. So,
And the visit to the pub as well. I thought that was
well, for that one person, I know, I know the person, and that is absolutely true. So, yeah.
it was probably the Queen's ladder. Yeah. Anyway. Other questions?
Sure, I have a question. Yeah, thanks for the talk, Rob. That was very impressive. That's just like a ludicrous amount of work you've done. Were you at all surprised by like the strength of signal you were getting from the hippocampus? Because I've seen those funny like mouth sensors that sometimes are used. And I was just wondering if you thought those are necessary to get a good signal from the hippocampus.
Yeah, so that was a study done back at UCL back in 2019, probably when Sophie was there. They are not, it's not a practical thing to do to have an OPM in a person's mouth, but it is not necessary. But yeah, that paper is quite an interesting approach. Yeah, I mean, at the start of this project, I was also quite skeptical because yeah, I came from a lab and from sort of experiments where I was only focused on the cortex, but I've been really surprised by the strength and yeah, just the fact you can see these hippocampal responses in basically every person. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
Questions on Zoom? Not yet. No, yet. Okay. I might just ask my other question, which was I was interested in. Seems to be there was an exercise memory. So, were people actually doing some sort of exercise during the virtual tour in the town?
What? Sorry, what do you mean by exercise?
When you lined up all the different memories and how well they were encoded for that participant, I thought one of them involved doing some exercise.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So yeah, I was curious about what sort of exercise they can do, but also conceptually, you know, people are doing exercise trials for you know, improving mental health and things like that. And so I just wonder whether we can actually measure good quality data when people are doing exercise in a somewhat vigorous way, whether there's not too much noise, and also whether we can potentially look at what's happening to the memories while they are exercising.
Yeah, so unfortunately this was just them observing an exercise class rather than actually doing exercise themselves. But yeah, at UCL we do have one professor who's keen to run an exercise experiment with the OPMs. There's all sorts of practical issues in terms of yeah, not too much movement, and the equipment that you have to use can't contain too much metal. So I mean, his preliminary idea was to sort of get a sort of like a bike that you use your hands. I'm not sure if that has a name, but yeah, that apparently gets the heart rate up quite high. But yeah, it's I think it'd be a really exciting area because of the benefits of exercise for mental health, that kind of thing. So yeah, it'd be very technically challenging at the moment, but I think given the improvement of OPMs and sort of, taking away all of the interference, yeah, I think it'd be a really interesting experiment to do.
So would the problem be more the noise that, finding a bike that is metal, that is compatible, or would it be the actual movement? Because an easy exercise to do would be just running on the spot. But yeah, that would of course help.
It depends what your contrast is. So yeah, at the moment, if it's a contrast between when a person is moving and when they're still, especially when they are moving a lot, there is definitely still some interference in there in the low frequencies. So yeah, it would be challenging on that front. If it was a comparison between two different types of exercise where the movement is equivalent, then that would be a lot easier.
Yep. Right, wonderful. I am aware that it's 1 a.m. Where you are, and this has been really wonderful for all of us. If there's no other questions, then we might let you go to sleep.
Yes, I think I will be going straight to sleep. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting questions as well.
Okay, well, thank you. All right.